roadmap towards the creation of a new autonomous region called Bangsamoro by 2016. With the signing of the CAB, a new hope has dawned. What is the roadmap towards the Bangsamoro? The Bangsamoro Transition Commission, or BTC, who represented a diverse group of people in the proposed region, observing the principles of inclusivity and transparency by holding consultations with various stakeholders, drafted the Bangsamoro Basic Law, or BBL. The draft BBL was submitted to the Office of the President and it was reviewed and finalized. On September 10, 2014, the Office of the President and the BTC turned over the draft Bangsamoro Basic Law to Congress and it was certified as an urgent bill. The bill now, both in the House of Representatives and Senate, is being reviewed for passage. Once passed, the Bangsamoro Basic Law will undergo popular ratification by registered voters in the proposed territory of the Bangsamoro. Upholding the consent of the governed, the people will decide if they wish to be part of the Bangsamoro. The results of the plebiscite will determine its geographical scope. Once the BPL is approved by the majority of the population in the Bangsamoro, the PRBM will be deemed abolished. The Bangsamoro Transition Authority, or BTA, will then be formed to serve as interim government during the transition from PRBM to Bangsamoro. The members of the BTA shall be appointed by the President. Once Bangsamoro officials are elected in 2016, the BTA will no longer exist. The Bangsamoro will have a ministerial form of government. The registered voters shall elect their representatives in the Bangsamoro Assembly, who in turn will elect among themselves the Chief Minister. The Chief Minister will then choose the deputy and other ministers to form the cabinet. Most of the ministers shall come from the Assembly. An exit document, officially terminating the peace negotiation, may be crafted and signed by the GPH and the MILF if and only when all agreements have been fully implemented. Alongside the roadmap to the creation of the Bangsamoro, while the bill is being deliberated and passed by Congress, a normalization process will also be implemented. Normalization aims to ensure human security in the Bangsamoro. It is a process whereby communities can achieve their desired quality of life, which includes the pursuit of sustainable livelihood and political participation within a peaceful, deliberative society. The process of normalization has three main components: security aspect, socio-economic development, and transitional justice. The security aspect of normalization includes policing, decommissioning of MILF forces and weapons, redeployment of the armed forces of the Philippines from or within conflict-affected areas, and the disbandment of private armed groups. The MILF shall undertake a gradual program for decommissioning so that their forces are put beyond use. This includes activities for a smooth transition of the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces to productive civilian lives. Socio-economic development programs shall be undertaken for the rehabilitation, reconstruction, and development of the Bangsamoro to address the needs of the Bangsamoro Islamic Armed Forces, internally displaced persons, and poverty-stricken communities. Transitional justice mechanisms will also be put in place to heal the wounds of conflict by addressing the legitimate grievances of the Bangsamoro, correcting historical injustices, and addressing human rights violations. Part of the confidence-building measures of normalization is the transformation of MILF camps into peaceful and productive communities, and amnesty, which will be defined in its parameters. With the signing of the CAB, more work will be done in the implementation of its various political, socio-economic, and security components for us to fully reap the fruits of our endeavor.
Ayan ho, this is my first time, by the way, in MSU-IIT, and I thank you very much for welcoming me and inviting me to your very beautiful campus. Napansin ko rin po na in this hall, madami tayong artworks on the Bangsamoro Basic Law, and I suppose those are recent as they show yung mga yung turnover of the draft basic law from the Office of the President to Congress. So in the video, there were some of the salient points of the Bangsamoro Basic Law and some of the components of the Comprehensive Agreement on the Bangsamoro already mentioned. And I would like to reiterate some of them, and I would like to take this opportunity to give more time to your questions, as you know, ako po ay uuwi rin po ng Manila ngayong araw, so meron ho lang tayong limited time, so I encourage everyone to ask your questions, to make your clarifications right now, no matter how you think these questions may be controversial, or how minor you think these questions may be. I invite everyone to make them today. So, a little briefer on the comprehensive agreement. Yun nga pa nabanggit natin na ang draft basic law ay nasa kamay na po ng Kongreso. Nito pong dalawang nakaraang araw, kami po sa OPAP at yung mga kasama natin sa Moro Islamic Liberation Front at sa Bangsamoro Transition Commission ay naging abala sa pag-attend ng mga hearing sa Senado at saka sa Kamara para tulungan ng ating mga mambabatas na maintindihan kung una sa lahat, bakit ba natin ginawa ito? At ikalawa, ano yung mga laman nitong basic law na ito at paano siya makakatulong, makaka-address ng ating problema sa Mindanao. So una, bakit nga ba natin ginawa ito? Bakit nag-embark ang gobyerno ng isang negosasyon sa isang rebeldeng grupo? Marami nagsasabi nung nagsimula kaming makipag-usap sa MILF, hindi ba yan nag-encourage kayo na magtayo pa ng mga rebel groups ang mga tao kasi yun yung gusto ninyong, yun yung nakaka-encourage sa gobyerno na makipag-usap? Ang sagot namin, kaya naging polisiya ng gobyerno ang peace talks kasi alam natin na nagdaan na ang Pilipinas sa maraming cycles ng conflict, ng cycles of war. And this is an internal conflict, meaning ang Pilipino, ang kalaban niya, kapwa niya Pilipino. At kapag gano'n ang senaryo, nakikita natin sa ibang bansa din, di ba? Ngayon sa Pilipinas, ang pinag-uusapan natin, yung peace agreement. Alam natin, pag nanonood tayo ng mga balita, ang pinag-uusapan sa ibang bansa, di ba? Magulo sa ibang bahagi ng mundo. So bakit natin naisip na ito yung paraan? Ito yung paraan kasi sa dami ng gera, hindi naman siya natapos. Hindi naman nasolusyonan ng armed conflict o ng war ang sitwasyon sa Mindanao. At yung paulit-ulit na armed conflict na yon, meron yung nadadalang costs o meron tayong pinagbabayaran because of that policy of engaging war with the rebel forces, which rebel forces have just and legitimate causes and aspirations. So ano ba yung costs of war? Diba? Yun yung nakita natin kanina, madaming yung nabanggit doon sa unang bahagi ng video na pinalabas namin kanina, na kapag may gera, madaming mga bata ang hindi nakakapag-aral, hindi nakakapasok, madaming mga namamatay una sa lahat, madami ang susugatan, madami ang hindi nakakapagpatuloy sa pagtatrabaho nila o yung hindi nagkakaroon ng oportunidad na bigyan ng kabuhayan ang kanilang sarili at ang kanilang pamilya. At most importantly, and this is more subsisting, madami yung namumuong hidwaan, yung feelings of enmity, of hostility, of animosity amongst people who are supposed to be neighbors and who are supposed to be conciliatory and amicable with each other. And this is very problematic because, as I said, we are all Filipinos living in one country. At hindi tayo nagkakaroon ng stunted ang ating development as a nation kapag ganito ang ating environment, ang ating political climate. So alam naman natin kapag mayroong pumutok na gera o violence sa Mindanao, pag mayroon namang travel advisories ang mga ibang bansa, hindi naman nila sinasabing, oh, don't go to Sulu. Hindi lang naman ganun. Pag sinabi nilang don't go to Sulu or don't go to Mindanao, the translation in the eyes of the international community is magulo sa buong Pilipinas. So yan yung nare-reflect sa ating economic development din, na nababawasan yung ating opportunities to invite more investors, to invite more development that translates to more jobs and more opportunities for ourselves. At napagdesisyonan din ng gobyerno na i-transform na yung relationship finally ng gobyerno at ng particular group na ito ng Moro Islamic Liberation Front from enemies to partners towards peace. Kasi isa nga sa mga napag-agrihan ng magkabilang panig ay yung status quo, unacceptable siya. Hindi maaaring forever na lang na yung itong bahagi na to ng ating bansa, itong arm, ay yung pinakakulelat lagi sa lahat ng human development indices, education, health, poverty incidence, sa lahat ng factors, lahat ng determinators, ay itong bahagi na ito ng Pilipinas ay pinakakulelat at hindi yun maaaring magtagal, hindi yun maaaring sustain. At naisip na ang tamang paraan para ayusin ang sitwasyon ng Muslim Mindanao ay mag-institute ng reform sa institutions. So, yung baguhin yung sistema para mas sustainable at mas lasting yung pagbabago sa Mindanao. So, ano naging epekto ng polisiya ng gobyerno na ito na itigil na nga itong pakikibaka sa MILF at simulan at gawing seryoso itong pakikipag-usap. Nabanggit kanina na 17 years nang nakikipag-negotiate ang government sa Moro Islamic Liberation Front. Napagdesisyon na pero alam natin na in between this, in the middle of the 17 years, meron pa rin mga spurts of violence between the government and the MILF. Pero nung napag-usapan, napag-desisyonan na seryosohin na natin to, maging committed tayo dito at talagang let's buckle down and go back to business ay simula ng 2012, zero ho ang skirmish between the government and the MILF. So kung matatandaan ninyo nung nangyari yung pag-declare ng Supreme Court na unconstitutional sa Memorandum of Agreement on Ancestral Domain, ang dami pong nangyaring spurts of violence noon. So makikita natin dyan, 218, 115, at yan ay 218 incidents. So ibig sabihin, hindi yan 218 people dead or displaced. That's 218 times a lot of people affected. Pero nung nangyari yung 2012, naging zero siya. So para sa akin, yun pa lamang po, ngayong in the interim, from the start of the serious negotiations between the government and the MILF, wala pa pong final na comprehensive agreement, wala pa pong draft basic law, na hindi na sila naggigera, wala nang naapektuhang civilian sa kanilang mga enkwentro. Para sa akin po, ano na yun, panalo na natin yun. Kasi in the interim, marami na pong mga investors ang na-convince na mukhang seryoso na nga ang mga magkabilang panig dito. At kung maririnig po natin sa balita ang reports ng ARM Regional Government, yung investors po sa ARM nag-shoot up para ngayon, nasa third quarter pa lang sila, na over-exceed na nila yung investments nung the previous year. So ganyan po yung epekto. Kahit hindi pa tapos yung proseso, marami ng gains na nakakuha because of this policy to engage in peaceful dialogue instead of armed conflict. So in the negotiations, the President's parameters were very clear that the parties must work within the bounds of the Constitution, that the parties must learn, especially the instructions to the government panel, was to learn from experiences from the past. So mamaya po mababanggit ko, may mga ilang features ang comprehensive agreement na bago sa ating paningin, bago sa isang negosasyon na pinag-participate ng government, kasi natutunan natin yan mula sa mga ibang tables, ibang mga nakausap ng gobyerno, na kailangan itong mga mekanismo na ito o itong mga arrangements na ito para masustain natin itong hinahanap natin sa peace process. At yung kinakailangan din na hindi lang siya puro pangako, kailangan i-deliver yung commitments, yung kanyang ability to be operationalized ay dapat nandoon. And finally, katulad nga ng sinabi ko dun sa isa sa mga na naging rason ng Supreme Court para i-declare na unconstitutional ang MOA-AD ay yung lack daw of consultation or transparency in the process. So isa rin po yan sa instructions ng Presidente. So kung doon po sa atin na maaring nasubaybayan o naririnig itong 17 years of negotiations with the MILF, ngayon lang po sa termino ng panel na ito, nagkaroon ng constant na na joint statement na nire-release ang panels every time that negotiations in Malaysia are concluded. And in between the talks between the parties go to the communities to ask them. That's why the agreement contains features that came directly from feedback from the people. So yung makikita natin ng mga features ng CAB na maaaring ma-mention ko mamaya ay nanggaling po yan, suggestion mismo mula sa mga mamamayan. Kaya kung makikita natin yung comprehensive agreement, hindi lang siya nagtatakil ng mga bagay na makakaapekto sa mga Moro o sa mga Muslim. Nandiyan din ng mga indigenous peoples, meron din mga provisions for the non-Moro, non-indigenous peoples na settlers, nandiyan din ang mga kababaihan, ang mga kabataan. Kasi nga, natanong yung mga tao kung ano ba yung gusto nilang mangyari sa Bangsamoro, kung paano ba nila mararamdaman na bahagi sila ng Bangsamoro once this political entity is established. So the comprehensive agreement, among others, contains 6 documents. The comprehensive agreement recognizes all the past documents that were agreed upon between the government and the MILF, but more importantly, it contains the framework agreement, including its 4 annexes and addendum. So ito pong 4 na annexes na ito, yung transitional arrangements, it contains the mechanisms, the institutions that were institutionalized and established from its signing to the establishment of the Bangsamoro political entity. So dyan po naggagaling yung pag-create ng Bangsamoro Transition Commission to draft the Bangsamoro Basic Law. Dyan din po na ilagay yung pagbuo ng isang monitoring team para alamin kung paano na nga ba nai-implement na magkabilang panig ang mga commitments na ibinigay nila dito sa Comprehensive Agreement. So nandyan din po sa Framework Agreement yung Annex on Revenue Generation and Wealth Sharing. I think ma-mention naman mamaya kung ano yung mga features nila. So power sharing, normalization, and the addendum on Bangsamoro waters. So this is our roadmap. Right now we are in the stage where the Congress deliberates the bill. At least the House of Representatives has made a commitment to conduct at the minimum 16 hearings outside of Congress. So sila po mismo ay magkakonduct ng hearings sa communities para alamin kung ano ba yung pakiramdam ng mga tao tungkol dito sa dinraft na basic law. Ang na-assure po dito sa proseso na ito, marami nagsasabi na yung consultation kulang. Alam po namin yun na, alam ng magkabilang panig yun na hindi pwedeng tumigil ang consultation. Kailangan niya maging constant. So simula pa lang nung nagsisimula mag-usap, hanggang sa may pasa yung batas, hanggang sa alamin na kung ano yung magiging kabuuan ng Bangsamoro, kailangan natatanong yung mga tao. Kaya yun po yung ikinaganda ng prosesong ito. Kaya yung Kongreso nakikiayon sa atin sa ganong prinsipyo na kailangan yung mga tao matanong. Kaya sila rin mismo ay bababa sa mga komunidad mula hindi lang sa Mindanao, pati sa mga taga Visayas, mga taga Luzon, hindi lang sa mga taga ARM na nag-i-exist ngayon, kundi yung mga nasa labas din ng ARM, ay tatanungin sila kung ano ba yung pakiramdam nila dito sa Bangsamoro Basic Law. So yun po yung on the political side of the peace process. On the other hand, yung pong mga bagay na nasa comprehensive agreement na hindi naman kinakailangang mailagay sa basic law, tulad ng normalization, ay nasisimula na po ngayon. So sa katunayan nga po, ang magkabilang parties ay magmi-meet ulit para i-finalize yung mga mekanismo na i-establish para masimulan na yung mga decommissioning of forces, yung socio-economic development, yung transitional justice na makikita natin sa normalization annex. So the comprehensive agreement's main feature is the creation of the Bangsamoro as the new political entity that will replace the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. As mentioned in the video, it will have a ministerial or parliamentary form of government. What does this mean? It means that the executive or the chief minister shall have direct accountability and answerability to the legislative. So, learning from the lesson of the autonomous region, the parties saw it problematic to give much power to a single executive, to one regional governor. So and also yung kasi ang composition ngayon ng Regional Legislative Assembly ay districts, di ba? Yung ang isang distrito ay buboto ng 3 miyembro na magiging bahagi ng RLA. Sa ganitong klaseng arrangement, ang ma-expect natin yung makakakuha ng boto kung sino yung miyembro ng majority. So kung nasa Lanao ka, malamang yung majority na family dyan, kung sino yung pinakamalakas na pamilya, yun yung makakapaglagay ng tao sa pwesto. So we didn't want that kind of polarization in the legislative body of the Bangsamoro. We wanted the diversity of the peoples in the Bangsamoro to be reflected in its government structure. So the parliament, true to its form, will have different kinds of seats. So just one of them is the district seat. So mayroon pa rin po mga representative per province or per city, pero hindi lang yun. Para masigurado natin na yung mga minorya nasa mga hindi bibilang sa majority ay makakapagluklok ng kanila ring mga opisyal at marirepresent din sila sa parliamentary. So meron po tayong reserved seats for the indigenous peoples, for the Christian settlers, and for women. Tapos meron din po tayong ibang sectoral seats na maaaring i-legislate ng magiging legislative body ng Bangsamoro o ng Bangsamoro Parliament. Meron din po tayong party representatives o yung mga iboboto because of their party affiliation. So kung sa National Congress meron tayong party list seats, magkakaroon din tayo ng something similar in the Bangsamoro Parliament. So how does the Bangsamoro government work? So the voters, how will it be established? The voters will have to elect their representatives to the parliament through the seats that I mentioned. So boboto sila ng miyembro nila ng distrito, miyembro nila ng reserved seats, ng sectoral seats, at saka ng party list seats. So pag naboto na nila yan at nabuo na ang komposisyon ng Bangsamoro Parliament, yung mga miyembro ng Bangsamoro Parliament amongst themselves will elect Chief Minister. So si Chief Minister, who will be the head of the executive, will come from the parliament. And this head of the executive, this Chief Minister, will then select his or her Deputy Chief Minister and the other members of the cabinet or the ministers, from majority of them coming from the parliament also. So makikita natin yung parang fusion ng legislature at saka ng executive. Kasi sa ganitong arrangement na makikita natin sa ibang bansa, mas mabilis yung programa, mas mabilis yung passage ng law and then enactment because of this constant cooperation and coordination between the executive and legislative without necessarily blurring the lines of both and disregarding accountability or checks and balances. Kasi nga tulad na nasabi ko, mas accountable si executive kay legislative, so mas madali nilang sabihin na if we don't want you there anymore, by a 2/3 vote of no confidence, the chief minister and in fact the entire parliament will be abolished and every one of them will lose their positions and new elections will be held. So parang ganun yung magiging arrangement sa Bangsamoro. And the Bangsamoro Executive Department will not stop with the creation of the cabinet. Kasi isa sa mga naging problema sa ARM, because of the tie of the natural tie of the local government units to the central government, which is the source of the internal revenue allotment, diba? So kung ang pera mo ay nakukuha mo sa national government, would you be encouraged to deal with the regional government? Medyo hindi, diba? So there is no incentive to deal with the regional government. And we want to change that in the Bangsamoro government. We want there to be constant communication between these government units para harmonize at in tune ang mga policies and programs ng isang buong region na ito. So magkakaroon ng Council of Leaders which shall be headed by the Chief Minister and composed of the governors of provinces, mayors of chartered cities, and again, sectoral representatives. So again, nandyan makakaupo ang representatives ng indigenous peoples, ng women, ng mga Christian settlers. So magiging representative din of the diversity of the Bangsamoro itong Council of Leaders. I mentioned earlier yung annex on power sharing. One of its new features is the creation of an intergovernmental relations mechanism. So nasabi ko kanina yung importance ng coordination between the Bangsamoro government and the local government units. This time, we also need to ensure that there is no disconnect between the Bangsamoro government and the national government. So there is no parang conflicting na mga polisiya or pag-aaway in terms of delivery of services. We made sure that there will be this mechanism. And then this annex on power sharing also provides for a ministerial form of government, as I mentioned earlier. And the bulk of this annex contains the listing of powers which are reserved to the central government or exclusive to the Bangsamoro government, meaning devolved to the Bangsamoro government, or those that will remain to be shared or concurrent between the central government and the Bangsamoro government. The wealth sharing